The only time I say that's a good question or that's a great question is when a student says something and it makes me think about the subject in a new way.
There was a related change that we talked about with the 8-second rule about how you respond when a student asks a question. You want to touch on that?
Sure. I spent a lot of time thinking about how do I encourage students to ask questions? How do I make it safe for them to ask questions? But how do I not give them inaccurate or false feedback? They include things like, I'm glad you asked that question because it's often important to repeat it. So that might follow the one who asked a question about something I just said 2 minutes ago. But if they didn't catch it, maybe I said it too fast, or maybe I didn't get it in the right context or something. It's not a good question in the sense of other students are going to go, oh yeah, that's a really good question. Instead, it's an important question. So I'm glad you asked that because I didn't think to mention this other point that is probably going to help you all understand what's going on. Or that's a question I'm glad you asked because this bears re-reviewing. If it's going to stick for the exam, you're going to need to think about it more than once. And so let's think about it again. And so there's a whole series of things that I ask that I hope makes it safe for students to ask questions that in a grand sense are not good questions, but they're important questions for them to be able to ask and to feel comfortable asking. The only time I say that's a good question or that's a great question is when a student says something and it makes me think about the subject in a new way, which happens even in a big freshman class. And so the student says something, then I'll say, oh, that's a great question. I've never thought about that. And here's why it's important, and here's my guess, but I have no answer.
It's like the Hollywood handshake on Great British Bake Off, right? Like when you make Paul Heideman pause and say, that's a good question. I've never thought about that in all this time. So we hope you feel inspired to go out and change one thing in your teaching, and we want to hear from you. So please email us at stli@wm.edu. That's STLI@wm.edu if you would like to make an appearance here in Studio 36 or virtually in our virtual podcasting studio.